Hey, you're listening to the Flash Traffic Podcast with me, Dr. Anthony Tingle. Today's guest is retired CIA officer John Sipher. John served 28 years in the Central Intelligence Agency's National Clandestine Service. He is an expert in counterintelligence, counter-espionage, and Russia, serving multiple overseas tours as chief of station in Europe, Asia, and in other high-threat environments. Okay, let's go.
Conflict, politics, military-industrial complex, technology, war. The Flash Traffic Podcast.
So Trump has been having a fantastical 100 days. Would you call it fantastical? Not fantastic, but
Are you who's defining that?
well, I love the gaslighters that try to say he's having a wonderful 100 days. Like, I love that.
I think anyone who works in and around Trump realizes that no matter what they personally think, they have to say everything is great and wonderful. And so, once you've compromised yourself and you're willing to do that, then that's the only game you can really play.
Yeah, I don't think the gaslighting worked out well for the Democrats when they tried to convince us that Joe Biden was, sharp as a tack. That kind of backfired.
People can see through things. Some people it takes longer. Trump is a better marketer, so like he pushes stuff out there, and and then overwhelms you, so that there are people who aren't paying attention who sort of just get the story, and that's where you go. But that's exactly true. I think the Biden people were terrible on many fronts, as we know.
Yeah, I think they messed it up. They had an opportunity. They mismanaged it from the beginning, but that's too
They
bad.
mismanage a lot of things. Think of the Afghanistan pullout. Like, to see how you could just see on your television how horrific that was, that we essentially lost to the Taliban. And then immediately they're saying like, oh, it was necessary and it was fine and nothing was wrong. Like, come on, like, be adults. If something's bad, say it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to make mistakes. There will be mistakes made, and Trump has made already. He's filling his ledger with mistakes.
And they never, even the smallest mistake, they'll never admit. So that's a weird world.
I don't know. I don't know if people are they're purposely ignoring it, or the way society has developed with social media, they just are in their own stovepipes where they don't have access to outside thinking, or they're just ignorant of it, and they're okay with that. I just don't know why people aren't looking at. We're going to look back, I think, on the first year of Trump, and all the warning signs were there. With Eric Prince wanting to round up 12 million occupants of the United States, whether they're undocumented or not. This thing with, what's his name, Bukaki in El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, some secret prison in a dictator's country. And then there's a story on Above the Fold in New York Times this morning about the tent city in Gitmo.
Yeah.
Arresting judges. And the list will probably continue for the next 100 days.
No, I mean, people can't pretend as if we weren't told. I mean, Trump ran probably the most horrific, awful campaign and said the most horrific, awful things, and people voted for him. So the notion that, oh my God, we didn't know this was coming is not true. It was almost like he was trying, at least for people like me, look like he was trying to lose the election. And the fact that he won did send a signal. It's a signal that, hey, people are okay with horrific things and racism and lying and all those type of things. And we saw from the previous time the level of incompetence. And so you talked today about that article in New York Times about Guantanamo. They created a place where they're going to put the migrants in a tent city. And, you forget, the awfulness, the incompetence. They set this thing up. They spent millions of dollars. They send tons of troops down there. It's going to be a complete waste. There's been hardly anyone who's gone through. There's something like, 100 ICE and military people for each one migrant. It's like
they said 25 military for each occupant of the camp.
If you're in the military,
about service.
You take your job seriously. You're defending the country and you're, ready to fight in wars, and you're like down there with like 20 other guys watching some poor migrant. Like,
Gitmo always fascinates me because for some reason we believe that because it's on an island, because it's on Cuba, it's like a mythical place that doesn't follow the rules of humanity. And it's always been like that. Uh, and we've done renditions. I mean, you were a CIA guy, you know about renditions. We have sent people places, people that we didn't want to take care of. And it's kind of like a rendition, but because it's Cuba, we don't, it's special. It's
Yeah,
something
it
special.
was legal twisting, like, so, when you talk about renditions, it's like sort of a nice word for kidnappings. But it used to be in the 90s, if CIA or FBI or somebody captured a terrorist abroad, we had no means to bring them back. The Congress said, "You can't bring these people into our country. You can't try them on US courts." Oftentimes, you would catch them in countries that were like, "No, we're not you can't hand them over to us." If you're in Pakistan and you capture a Libyan, they're like, "We don't want them."
Mhm.
So renditions at that period of time was, well, we talk to the countries where they're from and send them back there, try to make a deal. Like, you take them, you question them, you share the intelligence with us on this terrorist, because there was nowhere else to send them. And it was a dicey thing even back then, because you might be sending them back to places that have pretty bad human rights records, Egypt or what have you. But then what happened is, after when 9/11 happened and stuff, and all of a sudden there was all these Taliban and Al Qaeda guys in Afghanistan and places that were being captured. Again, the US Congress said, nope, can't bring them to the United States. And someone said, hey, Guantanamo is actually, it's a US military base, but it's not in the United States. And therefore, legally, we don't have to treat them like they're on US soil and give them. Yeah. So it was a game from the beginning. And probably people thought that was a game they could play for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And all of a sudden we're talking 20 some years, 25 years later, and we're still using it.
Oh yeah, you can't put the genie back in the bottle on anything. Like any legend, if this the Stable Genius Act passes, we will live with that forever. I think officially it's called Genius Act
Right.
for the crypto, trying to make America financially great again or something. I don't know. So you you were the station chief for Moscow, or were you the head of operations for Russia in the mid
Well, the
'90s?
CIA is a lot like the military. So, as a young officer, you're a sergeant, whatever, and you move up to colonel and general eventually. Station chiefs are the CIA's or the intelligence community or the president's intelligence representative in that country. So yes, I did serve in Moscow, but it was when I was younger and more junior. I wasn't the station chief there. I eventually was the deputy of our worldwide Russia collection and did a lot of work over my career on Russian intelligence, Russian counterintelligence, counter-espionage, working with the FBI, a number of other things. But also, I was chief of station in other places, right? So as I moved up through the hierarchy and stuff. So I would say, if there's a sort of an expertise, we're generalists at CIA in general, the collector side of the organization, but counterintelligence in Russia would be sort of a expertise, I guess. But I worked in a lot of places on terrorism and other things.
What was in the mid '90s? What was the uh, perspective on Russia from the CIA? Was it, hey, there's an opportunity here. We're optimistic that we can start working with the Russians, or was it these bunch of mafia idiots are privatizing everything and they're going to ruin the country and we're going to have a bunch of loose nukes in about 10 years? Was that what was the attitude towards Russia?
Well, I'll answer that, but I can see my wife's coming back and my dogs are going to go crazy. So just be ready for that. But
Okay.
yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think there in the 90s, I was there. I was in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in the 90s. There was a policy hope that we could develop a new and better relationship with the Russians. We could, try to help their scientists, that were losing money, to stay engaged on positive things, to try to work with Yeltsin and the Russian government at that time. But the one thing that didn't change was the security services. So, you had this massive Soviet state that was held together by the KGB repression at home and overseas hijinks. And the notion was, if your country falls apart, like all the institutions fall apart too. But the one place that didn't fall apart was the KGB, was the security services, because essentially they were the only one. They controlled the Communist Party money that was in foreign banks. They were, sort of the sword and shield of the government. So they maintained, when a lot of the rest of the state apparatus fell apart, the security services stayed in power. So working in a place like Moscow, you'd think, oh yeah, if Soviet Union fell apart, now we're supposed to be friends. We're be friends politically. There's business people coming here. It's opening up. It didn't open up on security. They followed us. It's not joking to say I had surveillance on me for my entire tour, more than 2 years. Audio, video in the house, followed everywhere, harassed everybody you talked to, questioned. Like, so the security state never stopped, and that's what's sort of interesting is the state fell apart. The notion was it could change. The security service continued to work, continued to have money and power. And then when Vladimir Putin came back in, a former KGB officer, he then resurrected it, recreated the security state, which was the only part of the state that seemed to be functioning, and then got them involved in everything from the economy to the media to repression at home to, disinformation and subversion overseas.
So, it, using that analogy, I guess, if the security state, the KGB, FSB, was the stable component of the 90s and the 2000s in Russia, then what does that say about the possibility of a significant regime change in Russia? Is it? Do you think it's just going to be business as usual if Putin dies and then the Siloviki or the security state just goes and keeps doing what they've been doing?
It's
Regime change.
interesting you bring that up because I'm in the process of applying to work to try to maybe get involved in a PhD program. And one of the things I want to explore is exactly that. Like, I think from my work in intelligence, defector after defector over the years would often say the same thing. And it was like, Russia will never be a normal state unless you destroy the KGB, unless you destroy the security services. Like, they control everything and they have such power through the entire country that, yeah, there might be sort of political change at the top, but the security services have such control that there's not likely to be change. And so if you were to ask me that now, I think Putin, has made sure that there's no actual political opposition to him. There's no political person to follow up behind him. He's created this sort of personalized dictatorship, but it's built on the foundation of the security services. So they've actually increased in size, they've increased importance. All of the top people around him and have, in the economy and in the security service are former KGB and intelligence types. So I think if he was to personally get sick and die or fall, I think there's enough of an institutional thing there amongst the security services that they would sort of make the decisions and set the table so that they maintained control, no matter who was put in that seat as the president. So, yeah, I don't have a lot of optimism about the future of Russia.
So during the Cold War and your career in the CIA, it seems like the CIA wouldn't hesitate to instill instability and coups and in countries that we are not friendly with or countries that we wanted to manipulate, but we wouldn't do it necessarily with Russia because they have nuclear weapons. Is there a chance that we might try to do that with Russia, either during Putin's golden years uh, or with the next, I hesitate to say regime change, but is there a chance that we have a plan on the books to just sow instability inside Russia? Just make
No,
it chaos?
I don't think so. The one thing that politicians and leaders fear the most is instability. I mean, maybe the Trump administration has more willingness to accept chaos and instability than most leaders, but stability and predictability is one thing. They're almost willing to put up with having an enemy as long as they sort of know what it is and how to deal with it. You mentioned that, yeah, the CIA was involved in overthrowing countries and creating instability, but it wasn't really so much during my time. That was the 50s and 60s, Eisenhower and stuff, and the early Kennedy administration they were very involved in those issues. It's called covert action. It was potentially assassinating Castro, you know, coups in Iran and Honduras and other kinds of places, Chile. Those things really changed quite a bit in the 1970s. There was sort of a massive reform that was built around a few Senate and intelligence and congressional hearings that changed the CIA. The CIA prior to the 70s was really a hip hop organization run out of the White House. Presidents could say, "Hey, you know, get rid of that guy, deal with this country," and the CIA, would go out and try to do it. Oftentimes, sometimes successfully, but more times not. Um, but by the 70s, it was institutionalized and changed. They created congressional oversight. They created rules about when a president wants the CIA to take action. It had to be, specifically written and shared with congressional committees. So by the time I came in the 1980s, the CIA in legislation in reality had the ability to take these kind of actions, but it was a much more formalized process. So it would be a U.S. government policy to, I don't know, engage, get rid of a dictator somewhere, or spread propaganda inside some kind of country. But it was more institutionalized. It was controlled by Congress, and it was written and with the lawyers behind it and stuff. So those days of overthrowing and creating instability, there wasn't so much of it during my time. I'm sure we can look back and I can find pieces where presidents push those kind of things. So there was less of that. So I don't think when you talk about Russia, I mean, you can see, for example, the previous administration, the Biden administration, they were so concerned about instability in Russia or Putin falling apart, or nuclear weapons getting in the wrong hands, or them maybe using nuclear weapons because they were afraid, that I would suggest we were actually too hesitant in how we operated in Ukraine and those kind of places. So I think most administrations are afraid to sort of push too much on instability in a place like Russia. I would often argue that I think that's part of Russian disinformation, is they put out so much out there that we're afraid of dealing with them. I think getting rid of Putin would be a good thing, but I think politicians and political leaders are often like, "Oh my God, if he goes, it could be instability and something worse could be in place." And yeah, that's all possible, but Putin has proven himself over and over to be a complete enemy of the West. And so I wish we were actually harder on him myself.
Yeah, I go back and forth on the should Biden have pushed harder earlier. Um, was there some hesitancy? Sure, of course. But my question is, what do you think Biden should have done? In a perfect world, do you think he should have just sent F-35s to create a no-fly zone? I mean, like really gone 100% all in on Ukraine right from the beginning. He kind of reinforced success and kind of sat back. The administration sat back. Jake Sullivan, I should say, not Biden, but just sat back and said, "Okay, they survived, and now how can we help them continue to survive and not necessarily win this war?" But do you think we should have gone all in right away? Like, this is our Gulf War?
I don't want to oversimplify it, but I do think there was such hesitancy that we would provide something. I'm assuming, oh, this might not work, and then, oh my God, it went okay, and then think it and go through, and then it's almost like we provided weaponry or support always one step behind where it could have been. I do think there was a period of time where the Russians were on such a back foot that we could have actually used the term won, or pushed Putin into a corner where Ukraine was in a much better position. So I do think, yes, we should have done a lot more. I can't argue with the fact that not to put American soldiers on the ground or use Americans flying planes. Of course, the Soviets and Russians did that against us in Korea and Vietnam and places like that,
Mhm.
and it didn't start World War III. But yeah, I do think we should have given more. Like we talked, oh, let's hold off on Patriot missiles, and then eventually, yes, we'll send them, or let's attack them. Oh, no, 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 let's send them. Oh, we're not allowed to let them, hit targets in Russia, even though they were just sitting across the border. All of those things, we eventually got there. We almost got there at a time when it was late. The Russians now realize that we talked about it for so long. The Russians would say, "Oh, now they're going to be able to go 30 miles inside of Russia, so let's just move our troops back 40 miles." Like we sort of help them defend themselves at a point when I don't think we needed to. But smart people disagree and argue over those things. Um, I'm of the school we should have been much more aggressive. I don't buy the bluster and bullshit from Putin. That's been his game forever: is threaten, bluster. We're going to do this. We're going to go to nuclear war, and every time it's just been a bluff. And so, we thought the Russian services and military was 10 feet tall. Oh my God, they're going to take over Ukraine immediately. There's nothing they can do. Come on, they're like 5-minute flight from their fighter airplanes across the border, and they can't fly into Ukraine and do anything or hit these, ATACMS sites or our Patriot sites and things like that. I mean, they're not 10 feet tall.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like we were hesitant, and that was bad, of course, but it seemed like we were on the cusp of letting the Ukrainians win. Like we were right there. You talk about the Russians riding donkeys and motorcycles and mopeds into battle. They don't have any tanks. They don't have any APCs. They don't have anything. They're just assaulting on foot. It seems like the worst possible time for Trump to get elected president and for us to shut off the spigot. Uh, it's just sad. It's terrible. What do you think? What you think Trump's going to be able to pull off a negotiation here, or do you think this is just going to be another? He's going to get distracted by some shiny object over here, and we're going to invade Colombia or something weird.
Well, I think Trump just wants, praise, and he doesn't think hard about things. He doesn't want to deal with hard issues, and so I think he was, hoping that just sort of because he's him, that somehow it could push these things through, and there'd be some sort of negotiation. I don't think he has the bandwidth, interest, brain power, any of those things, or patience to actually engage in what would require like a serious in terms of talking about ceasefires and peace and negotiations and give and take and all those type of things. That's just not him. He wants someone to just he wants to bluster and get what he can out of it. Yeah, I think it was a absolutely the worst time to have Trump come in if you're looking at the world through the Russia-Ukraine lens. I mean, Russia can't push forward. They're talking like 1,000-mile front, and they can't even push forward a couple miles. The drone situation is such that any kind of tank, car, metal thing driving is going to get blown up at the front. So the line is pretty stable. It's just lots of people get killed, sadly, on both sides. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Trump has this somehow 1970s or whatever view that Russia is huge, it's important, it's a great market. We're losing an opportunity to make huge amounts of money with Russia. I don't think that's real Russia. I don't think U.S. companies are going to go rushing back in there. I mean, it's got an economy the size of Italy. It's not. But in his mind, like, this is terrible. They're just wasting time fighting when we could be making money off of a great relationship with Russia. And he just has this affinity towards the Russia that maybe he knew when he traveled to visit in the 70s and 80s and things. So yeah, I'm not very optimistic that this administration is going to. But what's going to happen is Putin and Zelensky have no interest in stopping things. They both, and so they're going to sort of push forward unless they're forced by either the Europeans or the Americans or a situation on the ground to change.
Yeah, I think I'm a Euro skeptic. I think the Eurozone could have. They recognize the opportunity as well. It's not just the U.S. So we had the opportunity, we're going to lose it. The Eurozone sees what's going on. They see the donkeys and the mopeds. They know that for another 150 billion cash, they could probably end Russia forever. They're that bad. But they have not done that. They can't. The news today was Germany. Friedrich Merz lost the election. Then the re-election, he passed. Germany's in chaos. France is. I like to say France is full of shit all the time. They talk a big game. The UK seems to support solidly. And then the countries, the Baltics and Poland and everybody that's right against Russia, of course, they're going to take proactive measures to prevent the invasion of their country by Russia because they're right on the border. So
Well, I think one of the
it's
things
not
going to
all
come
the
out of this
U.S.
that I don't think we anticipated, but it's going to come out of this. It's a positive thing is adding Sweden and Finland to NATO is going to end up being a bigger deal because you're adding two somewhat larger, at least certainly modernized forces that are in that group of the Baltics and Poland and others who understand the threat from Russia. So you've actually strengthened the resolve of Europe and NATO, not the Russia, excuse me, not the Germany, France, or Southern Europe part of it, but
Mhm.
there are people who take Russia seriously and they take rearming seriously and at least have the ability to now to influence and try to push the others in that direction. So, but yeah, it's going to take a long time, but I think European air forces alone could do significant damage to Russia if they were to sort of try to take over the Baltics or one of those type of things.
Sure. I think at this point, I like to kind of say this in jest, but I really think with Western's backing, I think Poland could take over Russia. I think Poland has especially in the next 5 or 10 years, if they continue on the 5% GDP path and buying all the brand new South Korean tanks that they're probably
It
going to
can do
lose in the
serious
first
damage. The
five
problem is
seconds.
taking over. There's a lot of long history there. It's just a big place to to take over. A lot of room for people to hide in the Siberia
Yeah,
and stuff.
but
But yeah,
really, you only have to take over St. Petersburg and
we
Moscow,
shouldn't
right?
we shouldn't be
That
talking about
is,
this.
I, I think it's okay to talk about taking over Russia. I think, but like it's like uh, David Axe just came out with a little short read a couple days ago about he did the math on how long it would take Russia to completely take over Ukraine. Just a linear mathematical formulation
It's like
at
100 years or something. Yeah,
yeah, it's like 100 years, and they're going to lose 100 million people at this. At this, if
the
you
rate of
extrapolate,
success they're having
yes,
now, right?
if
Yeah.
you just do a linear extrapolation of what's going on right now, and that argument is fun to talk about. It's fun for me personally. I think it brings me joy in the world to know that that is a possibility. Uh, but reasonably, and probably even mathematically, we know that a couple of things that there are certain battles that are very important that could take an entire country or win the whole war. And we also know that there's certain locations like capitals that could win the war. And we saw that it doesn't take a long time for Russia to get from Belarus to Kiev. And they already have a 600-mile front. It is feasible in my mind that Russia could. I think this is the worst case scenario that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is that Russia stops doing these mindless meat waves attacks and simply goes to ground. And no ceasefire, no armistice. They just go to ground and go into the defense. And then Ukraine now has nothing to show for their war at all. Before they could say, look, we're killing 15, we're having 1,500 Russian casualties a month. Sorry, a day. We're 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 taking care of 40,000 Russians a month. That's what we're doing here. So it's a positive event for us in the war. But once Russia goes to ground, Ukraine is not going to mount an offensive. I don't believe they are because drone
Especially
warfare is
again,
just too.
the drone situation such
Yeah,
that you can't. I mean, they do oftentimes lose more people in a day than we lost in Afghanistan in 20 years. That's true.
yeah,
And to your point, also, we saw that when Prigozhin took just a small group of people across the border on their way to Moscow, essentially, you know, nothing was stopping them. I mean, for some decisions that were made, like the people who would defend the Kremlin and defend Moscow were either sitting on the fence or hiding, or so like Putin has to worry. I mean, that any dictator has to worry that they're in total power, but is anybody going to actually support them when push comes to shove. And the Prigozhin Wagner thing showed that, like, yeah, Putin has to actually worry that, yeah, all these people who are so fawning of him will sort of all fall away when the time comes. Yeah, I don't support, and I don't know that, taking over Russia or taking. I hear you. I think there was a period of time where the embarrassment and the losses to Putin's forces were such that, he would have been in a terrible political situation, and we sort of missed that period of time. But strategically, he's already lost, right? I mean, you've taken a country, you've just ground up hundreds of thousands of your citizens, you've screwed the long-term health of your economy, you've made yourself a second tier country to China on your borders. You've strengthened NATO. You strengthened Western resolve. You've taken a country, Ukraine, that you said, oh, it's like a little brother. It should be part of Russia, and you've made it so that the citizens there hate Russia and will forever. Textbooks for kids in 30 years will talk about the horrible Russians and how we always got to be ready to fight the Russians. I mean, it's a complete disaster. But Putin controls the security services and things at home and the media that allows him to maintain power, but that power is built on pretty thin legs. And so, things could change at any time.
He's probably falling prey to the sunk cost, error, where he's like, "We've
He
put in
doesn't have any
all
choice.
this."
What, like,
w-
he can't, a dictator can't say, "Oh, I totally screwed that up." And there's
yeah.
no way that the citizens can vote for something different or whatever. So he's kind of screwed. Yeah.
So this is him saving face. I guess he's and honestly, this so far in the negotiations, he has won. Putin has come out. If we were to just take what we know about the negotiations right now and just freeze and enact all the things that Witkoff has been trying
Like,
to
he's won
put in
because
place.
we're so poor at it, like, that we fought,
Yeah,
there's too many people around Trump that bought into the propaganda.
there's no reason in my mind, there's no reason to uh, let Putin get away with what Witkoff is presenting to him. There's no reason. I can see maybe freezing the lines, and I understand Crimea from a rational perspective, not an emotional one, but from a rational. How can Ukraine ever take Crimea militarily? I understand the situation from that perspective. From an emotional one, of course, Ukraine wants Crimea back. But giving Russia everything they asked for and not making them make concessions. I don't understand the negotiation strategy there. You come in basically. Witkoff has come in really low, and he stayed really low instead of coming in high and then moving down to a neutral position. I don't
It's
understand.
just foolish on all level. Just basic negotiating, not that I'm a negotiator or have any good business sense, but, like, to immediately start it off by giving away any leverage you've had, by giving to the Russians what they want, to buy into Russian propaganda, to send people with no knowledge of Russian or Ukrainian history to do these things, to be like put false deadlines on things. Like, I mean, it's almost, you can't imagine worse negotiating or negotiating plans, and it all is backed up by this complete misreading of the situation, and a sort of a weirdly pro Russian thing by the president of the United States, and like these, you know, idiot people that they've hired around him who are only there because they're weak and they don't know anything and let's do whatever the president says. And many of them who've actually bought into, like, the most blatant and silly of Russian propaganda. I mean, given all those things, like, it's actually surprising it's not worse than it is.
How long do you think it's going to take, or what is it going to take for Trump to realize that Putin is not here to negotiate in good faith? He's not here to be our buddy. He's out for Putin and Russia. Because it seemed like Trump was he is now just starting to get it with those missile and drone attacks on Sumy and Kyiv in the last couple of weeks, and Kyiv Reeve. Like, what's it going to take? How long is it going to take before Trump just wakes up and he's like, ah, Putin, you know?
I don't know. People have been telling him this stuff for through his whole first term. People around him, military intelligence people, but he has some sort of mental incapacity to ever admit wrong and to be stuck with views he held decades and decades ago. So that what is it going to take? Like right now, you can almost just imagine that Putin is laughing at him, and that he's being taken as a sucker. Yeah, I don't know. And Trump, you also just don't know because, he has no strong ideological views. He could change his views from one day to the next. And so the people who are hoping for the best on Ukraine are just hoping for one of these days he's just going to and then be supportive of Ukraine. Although he hates Zelensky, he thinks the Ukrainians were involved in his election and his losing the election, all which is bullshit. But he bought
Impeachment.
into it,
Yeah.
whether he bought into it at the time and then created it inside his head or whatever. So I mean, if you look at it put it all together, it looks bad. But that again, there is the chance that on all kinds of things he changes from day to day. So who the hell knows?
Yeah, it's just sad that the world has found itself in this place where the leader of the free world, like you said, doesn't take any advice from anyone. Like,
No,
hey Donald, don't build a casino in Atlantic City. I'm gonna build a casino. It's gonna be a great casino.
but even then, that was his
People are gonna love
decision.
it.
His decision. He could look at but
Huh.
here he's got the world's largest and best intelligence apparatus. We've got satellites. We've got worldwide diplomatic presence. We've got the world experts in our universities. We've got intelligence sources and spies around the world. We've got sensors. We've got allies that have many of the same things that are. So there's no shortage of information, and he makes decisions. He doesn't even ask for assistance. And you see, even on the Defense Department, Pete Hegseth and these signal chats, they're not even. Have you noticed in the signal chats they don't ever include an actual military person, a general, an
Mhm.
admiral, a
Yeah.
colonel? It's just these sort of
But
Fox
Hexeth's
News guys
wife,
talking
but
amongst
Hexeth's
themselves.
wife's in there making
Yeah.
the decisions. That makes me feel comfortable that she's some kind of like the puppet master of
They've
the
created,
Department of Defense.
I've thought when they created the deep state story that it was a populist game to try to convince voters that, like, oh, I failed, but I didn't fail because of me. I failed because of these people who are undercutting me. Where I assumed that they actually believed that was bullshit. But now I think they actually believe it's real because they have the access to this massive military and intelligence complex, and they just blow it off and they try to destroy it and they make decisions without even the simplest of. They could get he can get any piece of information he wants at any time. It doesn't bother.
Yeah, he's got the most powerful apparatus at his disposal, and he just blows it off. Now I kind of pray for the deep state. Now I want the deep state because I think in my head, you know, eh, if something goes seriously wrong, like Donald brings out the nuclear football, that someone in the deep state will save us, that just, will stop the madness at some point, or
Yeah, if
aliens
there
will
was a
come
deep
down.
state, they would have stopped the madness a long time ago. But
I,
yeah,
I don't, what do you think about this? And this is a conspiracy. This is kind of in your wheelhouse. Do you think that Trump has just filled his cabinet and all these positions with these unsophisticated buffoons because his first term, he was just thwarted at every curve by people that know better, that the bureaucracy just thwarted him. So this time he said, you know what? I'm going to fill every position with the biggest moron, yes man,
yes,
with the exception of maybe little Marco, who at one time had principles. At one time, he seemed like he was a doing the right thing, but now he's become a yes man too.
So yes, I think it's exactly what happened. He's created a narrative that he was thwarted by what he calls a deep state. But what he was thwarted by was his lack of interest in policy, his lack of learning anything about how the government works. He was thwarted by law. He was thwarted by expertise. So he would say, I want to do something. And they would say, sir, actually, that's against the law. If you want to do that, here's how we have to put together a policy and get with Congress. And he just like, all of that was either too hard, not interested. So that regulations, law, common sense, expertise, all of these things thwarted him from doing, sometimes very awful things that it's good to thwart him on. But then they created a story that, oh, that's because, he's a genius and all these people have worked against him. That's what we call a deep state. So this time I'm going to get around that by, yes, hiring people who will, under no circumstances, will ever tell me no. And that's what I think we're living with now. And so I think what you said is exactly what's going on.
What do you think's gonna, if anything, is gonna reel Trump in? Because it doesn't look like it's the court system. Is it gonna be the markets? What is
Yeah,
gonna
well, I
be
think
the
that's right. I think the courts are trying. There is pushback there. It hasn't been I think the markets are a big one. I think some sort of, sadly to say, events or a disaster that, even he can't hide from. Um, but in the meantime, there's going to continue to be lots of pain and at the end of the day, the place where that's supposed to happen, other than waiting for the next election, is Congress. And Congress has completely dropped the ball. If there is a reasonable elections in the midterms and Democrats win either the House or the Senate or both, if they do, that does provide some sort of pushback on sensible pushback on these things. But of course, he's claimed emergencies for things that aren't emergencies. Emergencies of the economy, therefore I'm going to do tariffs. Emergencies with the borders, therefore I'm going to just throw people out of the country without due process. Emergency. And so I worry he's going to say, oh, there's an emergency around the election. There could be violence. Therefore, we're going to withhold the election or some kind of thing for the 2026. So yeah, he's got people around him who won't say no. You got an attorney general who's in charge of this country's legal system, who is supposed to be an independent arbiter of who will just do whatever the president says to do, and that's a real scary place to be.
would you ever let's wrap it on this question. Would you ever buy Trump crypto? Would you ever
I don't think
are
I'd
we
ever
gonna
buy any crypto, but certainly not Trump crypto. Even if
are
it
we
was even if I knew I was going to make a lot of money, it's like I'm not going to have anything that has Trump anything on it.
we might have to pay for our groceries someday in Trump crypto. It
There
might
you
be
go.
the only thing that we have.
My God.
It might be, if you don't use Trump crypto, you just can't buy anything, at least in America and Venezuela.
Well, I mean,
So,
the man, like at the end of the day, the man is what, 78 years old, 79 years. Like, this is as awful as can be. Hopefully, it won't go on forever.
well, he is a stable genius, and he's healthy as one of the healthiest.
The healthiest people of all time that
I'm one of
no
the
one's ever
healthiest
seen
people.
before.
I'm the most best healthiest person. Yeah. Anyways, all right, John. Thank you for our chat. This was there's a lot of roads we could have gone down.
Exactly.
Didn't really dig into the CIA. I think the CIA might have this might be their heyday, because Trump is going to ignore the rule of law, and maybe the CIA can now just do whatever they want.
That's a
And
real worry. The Supreme Court gave him immunity so that he can essentially, have, and if he wants things to be done and done in secret for him, he can try to have the CIA do them. Again, the CIA is constrained by laws and regulations, but over time, if you put enough of your people in there, that you're going to push through that, it's a real danger. There are people in the CIA, even if I was there, that, some of the bureaucratic nonsense and pushback from the just lawyers and stuff, being more aggressive is not crazy, but I worry it's going to be so. He wants it to be his CIA. He wants it to be his weapon, political weapon. And frankly, I think it's too powerful an organization to be used as a political weapon by anybody. It's meant to be an intelligence collection and an analysis organization for the American people to keep American people safe. If it becomes a political weapon, it's, even if you like Trump, at the end of the day, you're really creating a weapon that's quite dangerous for all of us.
Yeah. Well, Putin found out with Wagner, when you create weapons, sometimes they can be
They
used
turn on you,
against
right?
you. Yeah. All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Good chat.
Yeah, thank you. Great to talk to you.
The Flash Traffic Podcast.